3 girls, 8, 9, and 10, were beaten to death early today while spending the first night of a week-long stay at a Girl Scout camp in northeastern Oklahoma. Bob Duff of station KOTV reports from Locust Grove.
The 3 girls had been sleeping in a tent-covered cabin like this one and were apparently killed in their tent between 2 and 4 this morning. Their bodies were discovered at dawn. As investigators began their work, the other 137 girls were put on buses and sent home. Mays County Sheriff Pete Weaver says there are no suspects in the case. Questioned by newsmen who were kept away from the campsite, he said the girls' bodies were found about 150 feet from the tent.
There was no indication they were dragged. Apparently they were carried.
Would you think then that they were killed in the tent and then carried out?
Yes, I think so.
Was there any evidence that they had been sexually assaulted?
There was evidence to that effect, yes.
Agents of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation began a detailed search of the scene and the surrounding area, which includes other children's camps as well. Meanwhile, the dead girls were taken to Tulsa for autopsies, the other girls to the Tulsa Girl Scout Center for reunions with their families. Bob Duff for CBS News, Locust Grove, Oklahoma.
I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. Don't know what to do, don't know what to do, don't know what to do. I'm not a weeping, I'm not a moaning, I'm a groaning for you. I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad,
Police in northeastern Oklahoma today stopped their concentrated search for 33-year-old Gene Hart, the man they believe sexually assaulted and killed 3 Girl Scouts at a Girl Scout camp almost 2 weeks ago. More on the story from Eric Ingberg in Locust Grove, Oklahoma.
From their command post in the Girl Scout camp where the murders took place, police made one last try at flushing Gene Hart from the woods. Then announced the trail has grown so cold they are giving up the full-scale manhunt. The country is so rough, and Hart, who was born and raised here, is so at home in it, that dogs, airplanes, and men have failed to locate him, and some authorities fear he may have slipped outside their search perimeter. Gene Leroy Hart was a high school football star in Locust Grove 14 years ago, voted the best athlete in his graduating class. Then a series of arrests, a conviction for rape, and prison. Hart escaped 4 years ago. Since then, he has lived in these woods, shielded, police say, by friends and relatives. Remembering Hart as a quiet, polite youth, many people in Locust Grove doubt that he was the murderer of the children.
I haven't talked to a man that knows the boy that thinks he's guilty, that knows him as well as I know him, or about as well as I know him. Not a one. And if I thought he's guilty, I'd be hanging him in a minute. Now, that's the way I feel about it, but I don't think he's guilty. And if he'd come to my place this evening, I'd help him get to town and get him the best lawyer I haven't enough to buy.
Although authorities claim to have a strong case against Hart, some of his friends claim he was singled out as a convenient suspect because he is an escaped convict and an Indian. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Locust Grove, Oklahoma.
And Bend,
runaways will diminish. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
The National Coalition for Children's Justice estimates 4,000 of those young American runaways are killed every year. A continent away from Washington, a jury heard about some of those young victims. David Dow was there.
In a city that has had its share of bizarre crime sprees, the case of the so-called Freeway Killer is one of the grisliest. The name coming from the locations where many of the victims were found. All were young white men or boys who disappeared and were later found dead, and in many cases tortured and raped. William Bonin, a 34-year-old truck driver and convicted sex offender, is accused of 12 such murders, though prosecutors in the televised trial have asserted he killed others.
We will indeed prove in this courtroom that he is the Freeway Killer, as he has bragged to a number of witnesses. Bragged that he has killed in excess of 16 young men and boys in that system.
And I must warn you now and admonish you that every single thing that the district attorney said this morning is not evidence, and you cannot consider it as evidence.
With pictures of the victims on display, the prosecution has called parents and friends to testify.
After you talked to Darren that day, did you ever see or hear from your son again?
No, sir.
Do you recognize that as being the body of your son?
Yes, sir.
2 days after Patricia Kendrick's son, Darren, 19, disappeared from a supermarket parking lot, his nude body was found in an industrial park. He'd been stabbed through the ear with an ice pick. The defense has asserted there are inconsistencies in the various accounts of some of these crimes. 2 other men have already been convicted of being accomplices in 3 of the Freeway murders. They will likely testify in this trial, which may last several months. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Charges were dropped today against the woman who was arrested in a massive raid on a Mississippi farmhouse last month and linked to that fatal armored car holdup in suburban New York. Authorities say the FBI...
During the evening, police used shovels and heavy equipment as they uncovered 5 more badly decomposed bodies of teenage boys at a small remote boatyard on the edge of Houston. So far, 17 bodies have been found in the boathouse, and police expect to find more when they resume digging later today. 100 miles away in Angelina National Park in East Texas, police found 2 more bodies last night. That makes a total of 19 bodies that have been recovered. Houston police say 18-year-old David Brooks has admitted the killing and says there should be a total of 25 to 30 bodies. Brooks says before they were killed, they were all sexually molested by 34-year-old Dean Corll, who police said is a homosexual and the apparent leader of the group. Also implicated was 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley, who admitted shooting Corll Wednesday and led police to the buried bodies. Henley was described as a junior high school dropout who lured the victims to Corll. Henley's parents are divorced. And his mother, Mrs. Mary Henley, refused to allow her face to be shown, as she told KHOU newsman Judd McIlvaine that she could not believe it, even though her son has also confessed to her.
Apparently, Wayne has talked to the police about other bodies that are buried in other areas. Do you think Wayne has anything that you know of to do with these people?
No, sir, I don't think so. I won't think so, unless he looks me in the eye and tells me, and then I don't know if I'll be able to believe it or not. Wayne's not a mean person, and I don't believe he deliberately hurt anybody.
The murders took place in this home in a residential area of nearby Pasadena. It was here that police found a sex torture chamber inside, and Henley said he killed Corll in self-defense. One of the first victims identified was 13-year-old David Hezakya, who's been missing for more than 2 years. The Hezakya had spent thousands of dollars for private detectives and in advertisements in underground newspapers in search of their son and a neighbor who disappeared with him.
I feared from the very beginning that something had happened to them, but naturally, along with our fears, we held our hopes that someday they would come back. We're still holding out a thread of hope that maybe there might be something, that maybe our boy's not one of them, but it seems like it points all in that direction.
Most of the victims carried no identification, and some have been buried for at least 3 years. Police believe most of the victims are runaway teenage boys, making positive identification virtually impossible. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Houston.
When police uncovered the bodies of 27 young men buried at Gacy's home, they assumed they'd be deluged with phone calls. The parents of teenage boys who have disappeared the past few years would call, and that would help in the identification of the victims. But it hasn't happened. It is apparently more comforting to hope that a missing youth is hitchhiking around the world or living in a Colorado commune than to learn for certain he's been in a Cook County grave.
We're not getting the response that we had hoped for, even from this area.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think originally the case had a lot of sexual overtones, and I think some people have shied away from thinking their children might be involved in this.
That just don't want to face reality. They simply do not want to be told, yes, among the unfortunate or the tragedies found here in this crawl space, yes, that is your son.
So police have had to seize the initiative, combing through old reports of missing youths. For some parents, the news is good.
Neighbors in this quiet residential community continue to file by the house, pause to watch police dismantle the interior, and then leave. These are the neighbors who knew John Wayne Gacy, and they find the murders unbelievable.
A very personable person and easy to get along with. And I've never had any problems with him, never had any reason to suspect this thing that it was going on here.
News of the multiple murders has prompted telephone calls to authorities from all over the country and overseas, mostly from parents with missing children.
Okay, I will call him, and then I will confirm whether or not your boy had seen him, and then I will call you back and let you know.
One Chicago area family says it suspected Gacy for the past 3 years. Their son disappeared after an argument with Gacy, and when they went to police to inform them of their suspicions, they were told their son was a runaway.
We feel so bad because police don't do nothing till now, and so many lives could be saved. They could find out 3.5 years ago.
That's the right thing.
So the search goes on at the Gacy house, and authorities cannot predict how long it will continue, but they say they fear the worst.
You know, I think when this whole thing is over, you might be witnessing one of the most horrible crimes, perhaps.
At 10:15, a haggard-looking Gacy was led from the Des Plaines police station, where he spent the night, to a car that would whisk him to Cermak Hospital for observation. Annoyed about photographers, he asked detectives to help him zip his leather coat over his head. Since Gacy's arrest, Des Plaines police have been monitoring hundreds of calls from concerned parents of missing boys.
We've received calls from various parts of the United States, as far away as Florida, New Jersey, New York, well, a lot of calls from the East Coast, and a lot of calls locally, too, you know, outside of the metropolitan Chicago area.
Meanwhile, at the Gacy home, detectives set about dismantling floor planks in hopes of finding more bodies. They confined their search to a small portion of the basement and garage. Fire department officials brought in buzzsaws and axes to help excavate the home. The sound of the saws could be heard outside the house. Detectives quickly filled a dumpster with debris. A large crowd of neighbors and passerby packed the scene. They included relatives of missing teenage boys who feared their loved ones were buried inside the house.
My wife's brother's been missing for a couple of years. He went to a concert a couple of years ago, and well, when she saw this on television, you know, she wanted to come over here and talk to the police because there's a possibility that, you know, he may show up.
Shortly before 1, a bag filled with what one officer said was body remains was taken from the basement. And 2 hours later, detectives hauled another body bag, this time from the garage. By late afternoon, the Cook County medical examiner, Robert Stein, verified the discovery of 2 additional bodies and the possibility of more.
There is every indication that there are some other corpses there.
How many? What?
This I cannot answer. I don't know.
You see what are the indications? Or parts of bodies under their bodies?
We just.
Are you part of the press? Or are you just talking?
Take it easy. That makes it a total of 9 bodies.
And you're right in the light.
Any other questions?
Is it going to continue tomorrow?
Oh, definitely, yes, surely.
What do you think the final total will be? You must have some indication.
Well, this I'd like to have Chief Dobbs kind of field that question.
Chief, how many do you think will be in their total, based on the information you have now? You've got 9 bodies confirmed.
That's correct.
And how many more?
I don't want to speculate on that number. I feel that there will be more bodies, but the total number, I'm just not sure of it at this time.
What's the percentage of the place you have excavated right now?
Half? A quarter?
About a quarter of it.
What condition were the bodies in and where were they found?
They're found in the crawl space, all of them, and same as the other, all skeletalized.
What about clothing? Any clothing?
No, I didn't see any clothing. No, I didn't.
How about IDs on the 4 from the other day? You got those yet? Any positive IDs?
No IDs at all yet.
They're talking about as many as 32 bodies. There must be a reason for coming up with that kind of a number.
I can't answer that because I just don't know the foundation for that number. I just don't know. Perhaps Chief Dobbs could tell us something about it, but I do not know.
Can you repeat again now in total?
Reason for coming up with that kind of a number.
I can't answer that because I just don't know the foundation for that number. I just don't know.
Don't let the sun catch you crying. The night's the time for all your tears. Your heart may be broken tonight, but tomorrow in the morning light, don't let the sun catch you crying. The nighttime shadows disappear, and with them go all your tears. For the morning will bring joy for every girl and boy. So don't let the sun catch you crying. We know that crying's not a bad thing.
The testimony about Gacy had been horrifying and contradictory. For prosecutors, he is a cold-blooded, sadistic killer who, for 7 years, schemed to murder and then dispose of 33 young boys. A predator, said 6 psychologists and psychiatrists, who knew the difference between right and wrong. The personification of evil, a rat, said one prosecutor. For the defense, John Wayne Gacy is not guilty because he is insane, a Jekyll and Hyde figure so desperately sick he cannot control himself or his actions. Attorney Robert Mata, how can anyone eat dinner with all those bodies under his feet and not be insane? 6 psychiatrists agreed. Gacy, who enjoyed performing as a clown, said he was confused by the proceedings, telling the court, "It's not that I am denying anything. I have never denied any of it. It's just that I don't know if, when it happened, was I aware of what I was doing. He had wept during the testimony of his mother and second wife. Otherwise, he seemed bored. The central question for the 7 men and 5 women on the jury: is Gacy crazy or diabolical? One answer could mean life in a mental institution. The other could mean death. After deliberating just under 2 hours, the jury said Gacy was not insane, but guilty of 33 murders. His sentence will be decided after a hearing which resumes tomorrow.
The chair right away would be fine. But like I said, we're going to keep him. We paid with our boys' lives, all these mothers. What does a mother go through to have the boys bring him up right, and then somebody comes along, snuffs their lives out? This is terrible. Now we're going to have to pay to keep him in jail till he gets whatever he gets, a death penalty or what.
Bob Fall, CBS News, Chicago. It was a tale unlike any the 7 men and 5 women on this jury had ever heard. So horrible, it is almost unimaginable, said Gacy's own attorney. And his prosecutor, Robert Egan, described the gruesome deaths of 33 men, all of them young, slight, blondish. The jury sat in stunned silence, barely moving. Gacy, he told them, the contractor who liked to perform as a clown, would lure his victims with promises of money or sex or drugs to this modest house where he would sexually abuse and then strangle them, swatting them out like flies, said Egan, because they threatened to expose him, then dousing their bodies with acid before burying them in trenches he had dug beneath his house. All this, said Egan, proves that Gacy, who liked to be photographed with celebrities, is a thoughtful, rational, premeditated evil man, adding, if there's another as evil among us, God help us all, a sentiment shared by some of the victims' relatives.
Well, I just like to see him, suffer him like he suffered my son.
But the defense countered that Gacy is sick, not evil, that his acts were impulsive, not premeditated, that he couldn't help what he did because he suffers from chronic mental disease, that he's insane under any standard and should spend the rest of his life in a hospital. And through it all, John Wayne Gacy, looking more like the prosperous businessman he was than the accused mass murderer he is, sat there motionless, staring straight ahead, never looking at his accusers or those who will judge him. The case against Gacy is largely circumstantial, but given his own admission of guilt and the unforgettable pictures of all those bodies being taken from his house, the question here seems to be not just whether one man committed all those crimes, but why. Bob Fall, CBS News, Chicago.
You have heard about the principle among journalists that a reporter must protect a confidential source. Some reporters have gone to jail for the principle, but it's not inviolate. Each case is different. Some cases require a hard choice. In a Los Angeles court case involving a particularly ugly crime, a reporter made a hard choice yesterday. Linda Douglas describes it.
9 weeks into the trial of William Bonin, the man accused in the so-called freeway murders of 21 young men, a surprise witness came forward. Claiming he could no longer live with his conscience, television reporter Dave Lopez revealed Bonin confessed to him nearly a year ago.
He says, I killed them all except one.
That was what Mr. Bonin said?
That's Bonin's exact words. I killed them all except one.
Lopez said Bonin described the murder and torture of his young victims in cold-blooded detail and said Bonin promised to kill again if he got out of prison. Although Lopez reported Bonin's confession on television station KNXT, he withheld the details. When the prosecution ordered him to testify, he refused, citing California's Reporter Shield law. Lopez said he feared the defense would try to force him to disclose previously unpublished information, which he said was privileged under the law. The judge upheld his decision. Lopez said he then decided to take the stand anyway after agonizing for months.
I testified as a citizen because I firmly believe that when the question comes up, are we journalists or citizens first, we are citizens first. The public has a right to know. The jury has a right to know. Every mother and father who have ever loved a child have a right to know.
Lopez said he felt obliged to protect Bonin's confidence until the accused killer confessed again to another reporter. That, said Lopez, violated their agreement and freed him of his commitment.
I in no way feel that I have compromised my beliefs as a journalist. Bonin did not live up to his end of the agreement. I told him, I confronted him with it. He knew that I was going to do this. So I feel very clear about it. In no way, gentlemen, do I feel that I have in any way embarrassed the profession or embarrassed myself.
Lopez will be cross-examined by Bonin's lawyer today. The defense may ask him to discuss conversations with other sources, which Lopez says he will not do. Linda Douglas, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Beginning in 1972, the bodies of as many as 44 young men were found dumped along California highways. Today, in a Los Angeles court, a twice-paroled sex offender was sentenced for some of those crimes. Gary Shepard was there.
William Bonin, the former Marine and truck driver convicted 2 months ago of murdering 10 young men and boys, was brought into Los Angeles Superior Court today for sentencing. The 35-year-old defendant, known as the Freeway Killer, had been found guilty of picking up his young victims in a van, sexually molesting and torturing them until they died, and finally dumping their bodies alongside Southern California highways and freeways. Calling the killing sadistic and unbelievably cruel, Superior Court Judge William Keene sentenced Bonin to die in the gas chamber at San Quentin Prison.
William George Bonin has demonstrated a wanton and total disregard of the sanctity of human life and the dignity of a civilized society. There was no evidence offered that in any way extenuated the gravity of this defendant's monstrous criminal conduct.
Bonin listened without emotion as the sentence was imposed. The father of one of the victims said later he was happy with the sentence and will be even happier when it's carried out. Gary Shepard, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Scientists in Washington state today predicted Mount St. Helens probably will erupt within 3 weeks.
Texas, thank you. Serial murderer William Bonin, known as the California Freeway Killer, was executed by injection early today at San Quentin Prison. Gathered outside were demonstrators on both sides of the capital punishment debate. Bonin was convicted of murdering 14 boys and young men in 1979 and 1980, and then dumping their mutilated bodies along Southern California highways. A Colombian-owned cargo